Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're going to plunge headfirst into a true crime case that'll leave you chilled to the bone.
Yeah, this one's it's a real doozy, and it all went down in Mobile, Alabama.
And we're basing our deep dive on an episode of the Anatomy of Murder podcast. Get ready, folks, because this one's a wild ride.
Definitely a wild ride. What's so fascinating about this case is how, these little seemingly unrelated events, they all kind of come together
Yeah.
to weave this intricate web of, deceit and violence. It really makes you realize, sometimes the truth is staring you right in the face.
It's hidden in plain sight.
Exactly.
We'll be diving into the disappearance of Joshua Duncan,
Oh, Joshua.
a 23-year-old who had some mental disabilities.
Yeah, he was
And this all happened over Labor Day weekend back in 2011.
2011.
And Joshua, he lived with his grandmother, Dorothy.
Very close to his grandmother, yeah.
And she practically raised him.
Right from the start, this case was it was off. It was strange. Not only was Joshua missing, but so was Dorothy's utility trailer. The police, they knew right away that Joshua was vulnerable. So they wasted no time in launching a full-blown investigation.
Yeah, and entered Dennis Hicks.
Oh.
He was a handyman who was kind of a familiar face around Joshua and Dorothy.
Yeah, they all went to the same church.
Right.
At first, he seemed helpful.
Yeah.
But as the investigation went on, he quickly became the prime suspect.
It's like that old saying, right? Things are not always what they seem.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
you start digging a little deeper and you realize there are all these inconsistencies in his story.
Like what?
For example, security camera footage showed Joshua at Hicks' house
Yeah.
much later than Hicks originally claimed.
Oh, so that blows his alibi right out of the water.
It's like that first domino that falls,
Yeah.
It's this whole chain reaction, and it just unravels everything.
And then there's the whole mystery of the missing utility trailer.
Oh, right, the trailer.
Dorothy, she had flat out refused to sell it to Hicks.
She would not budge on that.
But then, guess what? The police discover
Right.
that the trailer was sold to him.
Oh, no.
And get this, Joshua's signature was on the bill of sale.
Now, how did that happen?
Exactly. I mean, considering Joshua's mental disabilities, it really makes you question Hicks's influence over him. Was there any coercion involved? Was Joshua manipulated?
Yeah, you have to wonder.
And it really adds a whole other layer to Hicks's motives, doesn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. This case really shines a light on just how vulnerable some people can be, especially when it comes to those they trust. It's a sobering thought to think that someone who presents themselves as a friend, a mentor, could be capable of such darkness.
Absolutely. And just about a month after Joshua vanished,
A month later?
city workers made a truly gruesome discovery
Oh, no.
at an old police firing range.
A firing range? What was it?
A decomposed body,
Oh, no.
missing its head, hands, and feet.
Oh, my God.
DNA testing later confirmed their worst fears. It was Joshua.
The level of brutality in this case, it sends chills down your spine.
It's a calculated attempt to erase an identity.
Yeah, you're right. Make identification next to impossible.
And remember, at this point, Hicks is already a person of interest.
Right.
But here's where things take a truly shocking turn. Investigators uncovered Hicks's hidden past.
A past, huh?
Turns out, he had a prior conviction for double homicide in Mississippi.
Wow, a double homicide.
Yeah,
That changes things. It paints a very different picture of Dennis Hicks.
it really does.
Shows a pattern of violence, a capacity for taking a human life.
Yeah, you can't ignore that.
Absolutely not. The stakes just got a whole lot higher.
It's hard to believe that someone with such a dark past could just seamlessly integrate themselves into a new community.
Right.
A church, no less, while harboring such a capacity for violence.
You never really know who you're dealing with, do you?
But the question remains, how did investigators definitively link him to Joshua's murder?
Well, that's where things take another unexpected turn. You see, Hicks's young nieces, they were just 4 and 5 years old at the time.
Oh, wow, that's so young.
They were at Hicks's house that weekend, and they ended up witnessing the whole thing.
Can you imagine the trauma of witnessing something like that at such a young age?
Unimaginable.
These young girls, they held crucial pieces of the puzzle.
They did. And their testimony was absolutely chilling.
What did they say?
They described seeing Hicks dismembering Joshua
Oh, my God.
and hanging him from a tree. Just absolutely horrifying details coming from such young children.
It really makes you question
Yeah.
the whole idea of child testimony, doesn't it? I mean, how much weight should be given to the words of children so young? Could their memories be accurate? Could they be influenced?
All valid concerns.
Yeah.
But, the investigators, they got a break. A stroke of luck, you could say.
Yeah.
They brought in cadaver dogs to search the property.
Oh, interesting.
And here's the catch. They didn't tell the handlers anything about the girl's testimony.
So they were going in blind.
Exactly. They wanted to make sure those dogs weren't being led in any particular direction,
To get an unbiased confirmation.
Exactly. And what happened next? Well, it sent chills down everyone's spine. Those dogs, with their incredibly sensitive noses, they led the investigators straight to the exact tree the girls had described.
Wow, that's incredible.
Incredible and disturbing.
Yeah, it really adds undeniable credibility to the children's testimony.
Makes it much harder to dismiss their accounts as just childish imagination or fabrication.
Absolutely. So we've got our victim, a suspect with a violent past,
Right.
and eyewitness accounts backed up by forensic evidence.
It's all coming together.
But there's a crucial piece still missing.
The motive?
Ah, the motive.
Why would Hicks go to such extremes?
Well, the motive is often the most complex and intriguing aspect of any crime. It delves into the psychology of the perpetrator, their motivations, their twisted logic, And in this case, there are several possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Okay, I'm ready. Let's dive into those motives and try to make sense of what could have driven Dennis Hicks to commit such a horrific act.
Before we get into specifics, it's important to remember that human behavior, it's rarely driven by one single clear-cut motive, It's usually this complicated web of emotions, desires, and circumstances that kind of culminate in a particular act.
That makes sense.
So let's look at what the investigators considered, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it. Was it just about the utility trailer? Did he want it so badly that he was willing to kill for it?
Well, it might seem far-fetched, but you'd be surprised what people will do for seemingly trivial reasons.
That's true.
However, the investigators, they weren't convinced that the trailer alone was enough to explain the level of brutality in this case.
Yeah, it seems like there had to be something more.
Right, there had to be.
So if it wasn't just the trailer, what else could have driven Hicks to such a horrific act?
Well, as they dug deeper into Hicks's life and his actions, a really chilling possibility emerged.
What's that?
Just a few days before Joshua disappeared, Hicks tried to have Joshua's Social Security benefits redirected to himself.
Wait, he was already trying to profit from Joshua's death before it even happened. That's incredibly cold and calculating.
It certainly suggests that this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision, a crime of passion. This was planned, meticulously planned.
Wow, that's really disturbing.
It really paints an even more sinister picture of Hicks, wouldn't you say?
It does. It suggests that his motive might have been pure greed, just a callous disregard for human life. He didn't see Joshua as a friend, someone to help, but as an obstacle to be removed.
Means to an end.
Exactly. But remember that fire we mentioned earlier?
Oh, right, the fire. The one that happened around the same time Joshua disappeared.
Yeah, the one with fatalities. You mentioned some people suspected Hicks might have been involved.
I did. So, now, think about this for a second. What if Joshua had witnessed something related to that fire? What if he had information that could have linked Hicks to it?
That's a terrifying thought. Could Hicks have silenced Joshua to prevent him from talking?
It's certainly a possibility, isn't it? And it fits within the timeline and Hicks's established pattern of behavior.
He had already demonstrated a willingness to take a life to protect himself.
Exactly. So what do we have here? Greed, fear, maybe even a combination of both.
Hicks is turning out to be quite a complex and disturbing individual.
Someone who could manipulate those around him while hiding a very dark secret.
It's a reminder that things are not always as they seem. And sometimes the people we think we know can surprise us in the most horrifying ways.
It's a chilling thought for sure.
And this is just the beginning of our deep dive. Join us as we delve into the trial, the complexities of child testimony, and the pursuit of justice for Joshua Duncan. So we left off with Dennis Hicks, a convicted killer with a whole bunch of possible motives. But even with all the evidence pointing at him, getting a conviction wasn't going to be a walk in the park.
No, not at all. The prosecution had a big hurdle to overcome, how to present a case that was mainly built on what little kids said.
I can imagine the defense was ready to jump on any little slip-up.
Oh, absolutely. They were just waiting to pick apart any inconsistency,
It must have been tough trying to find that balance between getting justice for Joshua and protecting those kids from more trauma.
Right.
Putting them on the stand couldn't have been an easy decision.
It wasn't. They had to weigh the impact on the children against, how important their testimony was to getting a conviction.
And remember, this was no ordinary trial.
No.
The prosecution was going for the death penalty.
That's right, the death penalty.
Wow, that really raises the stakes.
Yeah, it does. It shows how serious this whole thing was and how determined the prosecution was to hold Hicks accountable for what he did.
The trial itself was this grueling 3-week affair full of tension and emotion.
You can imagine.
The defense, they tried to discredit the children's testimony, saying they were too young and easily influenced.
Classic defense strategy.
Yeah, but it's a strategy that has to be used carefully.
It does.
Making sure justice is done without, hurting these vulnerable witnesses.
Absolutely.
But the prosecution had more than just the children's stories.
Oh, yeah, they had a lot more.
They presented forensic evidence from Joshua's remains.
Right.
The security camera footage, and that chilling fact that Hicks tried to steal Joshua's Social Security benefits.
That last part about the benefits, that's just cold-blooded.
Yeah, it shows how premeditated it was.
It really does. It shows he didn't care about Joshua at all, just saw him as a way to make some money.
And don't forget what other inmates said.
Oh, yeah, the inmates.
They claimed Hicks had confessed to them while he was in jail.
Now, inmate testimony can be a bit iffy,
Yeah, not always reliable.
But in this case, it seemed to fit with everything else.
It added another layer to the prosecution's story.
It did. They were building a strong case.
Can you imagine being in that courtroom for those 3 weeks?
I bet the atmosphere was thick with tension.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone waiting to see what would
It
happen.
must have been incredibly intense.
You can bet it was.
What really strikes me is the bravery of those little girls.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Going up against the man accused of doing something so horrible.
Yeah.
Having to relive that trauma, it's just...
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Their testimony was powerful.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't always perfectly consistent, which, let's be honest, is normal for young kids.
Of course.
It painted this vivid picture of what happened that weekend.
I mean, they were just kids.
They were.
It's understandable that their memories might be a little fuzzy.
Absolutely.
The trauma, the pressure, the time that had passed.
All of that affects memory.
It does.
But the main parts of their story stayed the same.
Yeah.
And when you put that together with everything else,
Yeah.
it was hard to deny Hicks was guilty. The jury had a tough job weighing all of that evidence.
Yeah, they had to decide a man's fate.
6 hours.
6 hours.
That's how long they deliberated.
Wow.
6 hours of going through all that evidence, debating the testimonies.
It must have felt like an eternity for everyone waiting.
Especially for Joshua's grandmother, Dorothy.
Yeah, after everything she'd been through.
It was finally time for justice to be served, or at least that's what everyone hoped for.
We can't forget about the human side of this whole thing.
We can't.
This wasn't just a case in a courtroom. It was a real tragedy.
It was.
A tragedy that shattered lives.
It left a community in shock.
And when the verdict finally came,
It was a moment full of emotion.
the jury found Dennis Hicks guilty on all counts.
That word guilty brought a sense of relief to so many people.
Especially for Dorothy.
Yeah, for Dorothy.
She had fought so hard for justice for her grandson.
Nothing can bring Joshua back,
No, it can't.
but at least his killer was being held responsible.
It's a bittersweet victory, isn't it?
It is.
Justice is done, but it can't erase what happened.
No, it can't.
It reminds us how destructive violence is and how important it is to fight for justice.
The prosecutor in the case, Jennifer Wright, she put it perfectly.
What does she say?
She said, in that moment when the verdict comes in, when I turn my head back and seeing the look on Dorothy Hudson's face, that is why you do the job. In that moment, they get a little bit of peace in all of the horrible tragedy that they've been through, and that you were just a very small part in making that happen.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
It shows how much impact people in the legal system can have.
Absolutely.
They're not just there for justice, but to help people find peace after something terrible has happened.
It's about recognizing the human cost of these crimes.
Even with the guilty verdict, there are still questions, aren't there?
Oh, yeah. Some things we might never know for sure.
The motive, while it was talked about during the trial, it's still kind of a mystery.
We explored the different possibilities, but
Yeah, we may never fully understand what was going on in Hicks's mind.
it's unsettling, isn't it?
It is.
Knowing that there might be things we just can't comprehend about human nature.
And then there's the fire,
Oh, right, the fire.
the one that happened around the same time Joshua disappeared.
Could there be a connection?
It's hard to ignore the timing.
Was Joshua a witness?
Did Hicks kill him to keep him quiet?
Those are questions that investigators are probably still asking.
This whole case shows us that sometimes the truth is hard to find.
It is.
Even with a conviction, some things remain a mystery.
It makes you think about the limits of what we can know.
It does, and it's a reminder to be careful, to question what we see.
And to pay attention to those who might need our help.
Join us as we wrap up this deep dive, exploring the lingering questions and what we can learn from this chilling case. We've really gone deep into this heartbreaking case, haven't we? Uncovering all these layers of lies and facing the brutal reality of what happened to Joshua.
It's a case that sticks with you, you know? Not just because of how awful the crime was, but because of how it affected everyone involved.
It really makes you think.
It does.
About how fragile trust can be, how vulnerable some people are.
And how strong those who fight for justice can be, even when they're dealing with such a loss.
Well, Dorothy's determination through all of this is just incredible.
It really is.
She turned her grief into action, you know? She made sure Joshua's story was told and that his killer was held accountable.
She's a real example of how strong the human spirit can be.
She didn't let this tragedy break her.
No, she didn't.
She used it to fuel her fight for justice.
And those little girls, their courage is just amazing.
It's hard to imagine what they went through.
It is.
Seeing something so horrible.
And then being brave enough to talk about it, to relive it all in court.
They played a huge part in getting Hicks convicted.
They did.
It shows how important it is to listen to children, you know? To believe them.
To create a safe space for them to just share what they've been through.
And to give them the support they need to deal with something as complex as the legal system.
Absolutely.
But it also makes you think about the long-term effects of that kind of trauma on kids, doesn't it?
It does.
How do they move on after seeing something so horrific? What can we do to help them heal?
Those are questions we need to keep asking ourselves.
We need to understand how trauma affects children and fight for the resources and support they need to recover.
It's an ongoing effort, for sure.
Even though the trial brought some closure and justice was served, there are still some unanswered questions.
There are, aren't there?
The motive, we talked about the different possibilities.
Right.
But we still don't know for sure what drove Hicks to do something so terrible.
It's like there's this piece of the puzzle that's still missing.
Yeah, we might never fully understand the depths of his cruelty, you know, what pushed him to that point. Was there something dark inside him that we can't even fathom?
It's a disturbing thought.
It is. And then there's the fire.
The fire, right?
The one that happened around the same time Joshua disappeared.
It's hard not to wonder if there's a connection there.
Could Joshua have seen something that put Hicks at risk? Did Hicks kill him to keep him quiet?
It's a theory that a lot of people believe.
This whole case shows us that sometimes the truth is hard to grasp.
It can be, yeah.
Even when someone is convicted, there can still be unanswered questions, mysteries that might never be solved.
It's a reminder that we don't always have all the answers.
It also makes you appreciate how complicated human behavior can be.
And how important it is to always be questioning, always be looking deeper.
This deep dive into Joshua's story has been a journey, hasn't it?
It has.
We've seen the justice system at work, the good and the bad, the intricate web of human behavior.
And how resilient people can be in the face of tragedy.
It's a story that will stick with me, I think.
Me too.
It makes you rethink your assumptions about people.
It does.
And appreciate the importance of fighting for what's right.
Absolutely.
It also reminds us to be kind, to be compassionate, you know? Especially in a world that can often feel so cold and uncaring.
That's a good reminder for all of us.
We hope you found this deep dive insightful and thought-provoking.
We hope it's given you something to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
We'll see you next time, Deep Divers.